And we're now going to jump industries by featuring a project called Open Call that blurred the boundaries between finance and opera. We're going to welcome on stage the head of Behavioural-Quant Finance at Barclays, Greg Davies. Please put your hands together for Greg, everybody.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. What you have playing in the background is actually the opening bars of our experimental opera, and I'm gonna let it run just for about 45 seconds or so. What you'll start to hear is trading. People trading assets in an artificial market, except that they can only trade by singing. Pick up one of these. So what you have there are, you heard four singers, and what they were trying to do was in fact not to sing. They were trading. They were given a portfolio of artificial assets in a functioning but artificial market, and what they were trying to do was make money. They were paid, the singers were paid at the end of the evening according to how well they had traded. So the interesting thing about this is you've got a musical experience created out of people pursuing completely non-musical ends. They are pursuing a financial end of trying to make money, but it's creating, in the same way as you see schools of fish flow rapidly from one side to the other, or birds in murmuration, the emergent properties of the system can be quite beautiful, even when people are pursuing their own entirely non-aesthetic ends. Now, this was a project that genuinely would not have happened if it had been only in the musical world or only in the commercial world. In order for it to happen, the very conception of it was about blending art with the commercial experience, but also the execution required this blend of artistic creativity and commercial knowledge. So it came about in, I think, early 2011. I was approached, so I'm a banker. This isn't the sort of thing I do on a regular basis. I don't create operas and put them on a regular basis. But I got a rather unusual email from a chap called Alexis Kirk, who I will introduce you to at the end in a video clip I'm going to play right at the end. The email was one of the more off-the-wall emails I've ever received, which said, I have this conception. I, Alexis Kirk, nice to meet you. I am a composer. I used to work in finance. I have a PhD in computer programming, and I'm now completing my second PhD in musical composition. So you've got to understand this is a fairly unusual character. Then he said, I've been struck for a long time about open outcry markets, these markets where people are yelling and screaming in order to trade. And the energy, the excitement, the emotion that we see in these markets seems to be something that is entirely opposite to be able to turn into a musical experience, but I don't know how to do it. Could you help me? And he claims that I was the first person he'd come to, but what he didn't realize when he sent me this email was, firstly, I've been a singer myself since I was about 8, so I was very interested in the experience. I've always been into music. And secondly, my field of specialty within banking, I'm sort of more of an academic that's moved across to banking, is in behavioral finance, understanding the psychology of financial decision-making, understanding how people make decisions and how markets work. So between the two of us, we came across a way of actually creating an artificial market So there's a computer model of the market in the background. Traders are given assets. We created a simplified market with just 3 assets, which for various reasons we called wealth, comfort, and protection, which are essentially the essential abstract things that people are pursuing when they trade. We're seeking wealth, we need comfort, and we need protection from risk. And we created this artificial market that was run by a computer model randomly generating prices in the background that the singers would see on screens. And the idea here was to try and express some of the emotional ride that we all feel when we engage in investing activities or financial activities. This is the sort of chart that you often see when people talk about the emotional experience of investing. Along the market cycle, people start from reluctance. We don't like taking risk. It feels uncomfortable. So we tend to sit sit uninvested for far too long. As times get good, we get optimistic, we get excited, we get exuberant, and we enter these bubbles at the top where everyone gets over-enthusiastic, irrationally exuberant. And then when the bubble pops, we enter denial. We start to go through fear, panic, desperation, capitulation. And at every step along these ways, our decisions are fueled by our emotions. And as much as we like to think that our decisions, the decisions that we make as rational human beings, are in pursuit of our objectives, actually a lot of the time the decisions we make are driven by our very immediate visceral need for comfort, to feel comfortable with our decisions at the moment. And when that is taken into a professional context and people are trying to make money in a very combative, aggressive world, we get this sort of thing. Now, sadly, open outcry markets don't really exist anymore. There are only 1 or 2 functioning open outcry markets in the world anymore. But we thought in the same way as these schools of fish or flocks of birds create something that is beautiful in aggregate, even when the movements are of each individual fish or each individual bird are not there to create aesthetic beauty. There is something beautiful about the emergent properties of financial systems when these millions of people making emotionally driven decisions result in these price movements, in these patterns. So let's see if we can do something with that. Now, the first problem with this was once we had done all the thinking to try and figure out how this works, is how do we get it put on? So I said to him, well, I work for Barclays. It's an interesting place to work. I'm a behavioral psychologist crossed with a finance geek, and they found a job for me. And I doubt that they're going to be interested in sponsoring this or paying for it. So why don't we shop this around to as many banks as we can? But I have to go and ask my employer first to give them right of first refusal. And this was in 2012, post-crisis. And at that time, and as indeed now, it was fertile ground. Banks were trying desperately to demonstrate to the public that they weren't all boring, all nasty, or evil, that in fact finance and banking can have elements of creativity, can be playful if looked at in the right way, can have space for people to do creative things. So much to my surprise, Barclays said, yes, we'd love to put it on, and we'll do it as an event for our clients, and we will sponsor the whole thing. And that actually led to us being able to premiere this opera in Mansion House in 2012. Now, we've called it an opera for the sake of for the lack of any other terms for it. It's not really an opera. There are singers, but the singers are not, as I said, trying to pursue aesthetic aims. They're trying to make money. So in a sense, the work is more of, we've called it a reality opera because the music arises spontaneously by people being themselves in the way. You can think of it more as being a duet for market and cello. So the cello that you heard is there to provide some sort of musical narrative, some musical arc to the experience. But once we put this in motion on the night, we actually had very little control over what was going to happen. We also had an audience, and this is the interesting thing about cross-industry and cross-disciplinary collaboration, is we had an audience that was comprised of clients of ours and people largely from the financial services industry. These are not people who are the natural audience for experimental music. So we also had no idea how the audience would accept this and appreciate it. And I have to say, it's possibly the single most nerve-wracking evening I've had in my entire career, but very glad we did it. One of the ways we persuaded Barclays to do this was to say, you're interested in promoting your thought leadership, the fact that you think deeply about things. You're interested in promoting the fact that we do behavioral finance. We think about emotions when we advise our clients. And we have these tools like this one, which is a financial personality assessment tool that I and my team designed back in 2007. It enables us, it's a psychometric test, it enables us to understand the financial personality of our clients. So what we said to Barclays is we will put this at the forefront. When we create this market, we will also test the financial personality of all the singers, the traders. We will collect data from the evening. We'll use this as actually an exploration of not only the creative side of the market creation of the musical piece, but also of how financial personality expresses itself and the sort of tools that we use in banking. The next set of problems was how to actually create this. It was very complicated because we have to take a functioning market, we have to create one from scratch, we have to somehow retain the essence of these open outcry markets whilst simplifying back to something that's functional. Now, we used a very good choir. The Elysian Singers is a chamber choir that sits in London. They specialize in contemporary music, very technically difficult stuff. But the thing about this is that these singers are having to trade. They have to memorize phrases. There was a buy phrase and a sell phrase for each of those three assets. They have to memorize 6 phrases, and they're not singing it according to a score. They're having to look at their portfolio and find individuals to trade around the room. They were all spread around the edge of the room, and actually try to close a deal whilst pitching their notes, remembering the correct phrase, adjusting the price up and down until they found a clearing deal. So that they were being asked to do a tremendous amount. And we had to do an enormous amount of training to take singers and actually teach them how to trade, which included the hand signals that traders will use in open outcry markets, because when you've got 12 people spread around the edge of a big room, the audience was actually sat in the middle so as to give them an immersive experience. You have to try and catch the eye of one of the other 11 people and match your trades in order to close a deal. We had to figure out how the trades are actually going to get entered into the system. We had a system with a computer model. There was a feedback loop where if everyone was buying, if the trades were being initiated by lots of people trying to buy, it would nudge the market upwards. If people were trying to sell, it would nudge the market downwards. The singers didn't know this, but we've all got all sorts of complicated feedback mechanisms that we have to have this interaction between the computer system driving the market and the singers themselves. So how do we record the trades? How do the traders negotiate? How do we prevent them from gaming the system? So Elysian Singers is not a professional choir. These singers typically have other jobs. They're, I don't know, bankers, lawyers. We had one actuary, we had a mathematician, we had a genuine rocket scientist, most of whom were trying to figure out how the mathematics of the market was working before we went into it in order that they could try and game the system. So we had to try and close all sorts of loopholes. But I'm going to just run you through a little bit of the structure, and then I'll close with a video clip of the evening. So we have these 3 assets. We call them wealth, and there's a distribution of outcomes. For those of you who are mathematically minded, we're trying to create a probabilistic distribution under the market. There's protection that has a slightly different risk and return combination. We have comfort, which is a much narrower one, much narrower range of distributions. And then there are correlations between these things. And we had different market regimes, so they could be a standard regime, it could go into a boom regime or a bust regime. And that was the only thing the conductor really had control over, was he had the ability to nudge the whole computer model into a boom state or a bust state for brief periods of time. The phrases themselves, Alexis used a genetic algorithm to construct the musical phrases. So what you do is you start with a bunch of seed phrases. You you're trying to look for specific things, and then you allow a computer to evolve and mutate those phrases and select the ones that are better suited to achieving those things. And what those things were is we wanted the buy and sell phrase for each asset to look together harmonically. So that if two singers were buying and selling the same asset simultaneously and closing a deal, it would sound nice. It would be a harmonic lock. If everyone was trying to buy, so markets are buoyant, the three buy phrases were constructed so that they all sounded harmonically pleasant when sung together. But if everyone was trying to sell, the sell phrases were deliberately discordant. So you're trying to create properties that will emerge from the system without having any control over how any of the individuals in the system are actually working. The other thing we had to do was to make it really, really easy for singers to close a deal. So when they've closed it, how do you record it in the system? We had people running around collecting these trading cards, which went through a number of rounds of design because singers had to be able to not only pitch their notes, sing the music, close the deal, but then write down the essential information, hand it to a runner that would enter it into the system, etc. And from a corporate perspective, this was really interesting because I managed to get a whole bunch of people just to volunteer to participate in this because they thought it was fun. Because they work in a bank, and this is something that had never happened in a bank before, and they liked the idea of doing this. And this was an eye-opening thing for me, is that even in really traditional, relatively staid corporate environments, if you give people the excuse or the justification to allow them to go and do something creative, there's an astonishing amount of people who will grasp at those straws. So just because someone is a banker or an accountant or a lawyer, etc., doesn't mean that they don't have a creative vein running through their body and want to get involved in these things. We also, of course, measured the financial personality of all of our singers. So here you can see our 12 singers, and there are their scores on risk tolerance, how risk-taking they are. Some were very, very conservative, none really high. They were all sort of conservative to medium. And what we call the Composure score, something that is fundamentally important in finance, is how much of a nervous wreck are you when things are happening around you? So you can see some people like the two at this end, very high composure, laid back, take the stress very easily, whereas some of those, particularly at the left-hand side, much, much more stressed individuals. These things make a difference to how people respond in these sort of environments, and it's those differences between people that actually make this an interesting exercise. So that's the room on the night. Beautiful room, the Egyptian Hall in Mansion House. This is one of the great advantages of having a corporate sponsor for something like this. You get to do it in a really wonderful, wonderful venue. Another unexpected thing was an old school friend of mine when we were 12 in high school. I went to school with a guy who subsequently became an opera director. Never in my life did I think I'd have an opportunity to work with him professionally, but I managed to get him into the project, and he came in to direct the thing, and it was actually really wonderful to work with an old friend who I knew what he did, but I'd never seen him do it. And it's intriguing to see friends of yours work. It just very seldom happens unless they're friends who work in your industry. But I often find it difficult to conceive of my friends in a working role because I only ever see them, out eating, drinking, etc. This is what happened on the night. Now you can see those three assets. This we had not planned for. So it's a random model underlying this. The markets could have gone up, they could have gone down, they could have done all sorts of things. Miraculously, on the night, we somehow managed to engineer in the half hour of this opera something that resembled the financial crisis. The markets just kept going down and down and down, particularly that wealth asset. And it resulted in one particular manifestation of the music, which had possibly a great deal more discordance than it could otherwise have had. And it also had the effect of making the singers at some point very, very despondent, because as they were trading, they were just losing money and losing money. And there was one crucial moment where actually everyone stopped trading, and there was just silence and one note of the cello. And it was about 10 minutes before it was due to end, before the closing bell of the opera. And I thought, oh God, they've all given up. This is going to be a complete disaster. And then in possibly the most aesthetically beautiful moment of the whole thing, just one voice came back in and started trying to buy again. And it really is something that you could have designed it as a narrative arc of a scripted process, and it was truly a sort of beautiful moment. But it happened entirely spontaneously, and I'm very glad it did, because it was thoroughly nerve-wracking. These, for example, so what you see along this axis is time from the beginning of the market to the end of the market. That patch there is where the conductor for a while tried to boost this into a boom state. There's when he put it into a bust state, and you can see they responded by falling. At the end, he was desperately trying to bring the markets up again, put it back into a boom state. It didn't work that well. And overlaid on that, you can see here all the actual trades that were made. So the red ones were trades that were initiated by someone trying to sell, and the green dots were trades that were initiated by someone trying to buy. So we've got this market, this functioning market that people are getting paid for how well they do, and all this data around it that we can collect and examine, and we've done all sorts of little analyses on it afterwards. And yet, it's a musical experience. It's an aesthetic experience. It's a work of art. And I find that distinction, that tension between these things that runs through this was a very philosophically interesting experience. Couple of snaps from the night. You can see that the singers were all standing up on podia, so they could project over the audience. The conductor was in the middle, had control over some of the computing stuff, and there was a cellist there to give some direction. And in each of the four corners of the room were these two giant screens with the prices of the portfolios and the individual portfolios of each of the singers, so they can see what do I own now, what do I need to sell, what do I need to buy. I'm just going to play you two brief clips of the sort of where it got a bit more hectic and discordant in the middle. And you can see this, it's not Mozart. This is quite difficult to listen to. But when you were there, even this audience that was completely unused to experimental music actually found it a really immersive experience, to the point where something that was very unpredictable or unpredicted is the audience started supporting the trader that was near them. And spontaneous little bursts of applause broke out when one of their traders close to them closed a deal. And it's this thing where you couldn't actually predict that would happen in any way whatsoever. And again, it's something I think quite beautiful, where the interaction between a work of art and the audience actually adds something additional to the creative process itself. So let me just play you two. Here's one, which is about a 10-second clip. That was when everyone was getting despondent, trying to sell. Everything got a bit quieter. There was very little energy. And there was one other trick the conductors could have, is he could give a hand signal that would stop everyone singing, and they could revert to shouting to give a sense of how this would revert to a real open outcry situation. And that clip is here. So all sorts of technically difficult things to do. Pitching it was incredibly difficult. One of the reasons we had a cellist there was the singers didn't all have perfect pitch. They need to know how to find their note. So there was a signal any one of the singers could give to the cellist that would mean the cellist would instantly go back. The cellist was improvising quite a lot of this, could instantly go back to a G and give the singers their pitch. All sorts of things like that we had to build in. And then at the end, we got all the data out of it, and we can see, there's the individual that won in the end, that person on the left, and we can see how much cash they had left in their portfolio. Because markets were dropping through most of this, actually the people that did best were the people that were most conservative, the people that held on to cash, the people that were selling things. And we could also see how this relates to their personality. So typically, the light blue bars there are something we call market engagement, your willingness to engage with activity in the market. And you can see that the two winners there both had very low market engagement. And belief in skill is your willingness essentially to believe that you have control over your destiny in the markets, your willingness to pay for your willingness to try and be clever and do something active rather than just to sit back and buy the market. And typically, the people who did best had relatively high belief in skill. Number 7 there is an outlier. Number 7 actually had those features and didn't do that well, but that's because number 7 had another personality characteristic, was a very, very extreme risk taker who got involved. So we did in the end find that how people acted in that half an hour on the evening was to a strong degree related to their individual personalities. And I'm going to end with just the video clip from the evening. It'll repeat a little bit of what I've said, but it'll also give you more of a sense of the immersive experience. You can never quite get it because the audience was in the middle with everyone, with all the music happening around, but hopefully that'll give you a sense of what it felt like on the night. Open outcry markets are those markets where you see traders yelling and shouting at each other in order to trade in a frenzy of activity.
It's very human. It involves emotion. You only have to look at pictures of the old open outcry trading floors, and the emotions expressed, you can see in their faces, in their hand gestures. They're very intense. There's a lot of money being made and lost. There's a lot of transactions being done, and they are making noise.
Why this is particularly interesting for me is that as someone who specializes in behavioral finance, markets are really representative of the emotions, the emotional states of the people involved in them. This desire to trade, this desire to get gains, this fear of losses, all these things express themselves in this outcry, this frenzy of the markets.
So what would happen if you had a market, just a pretend market, and you got singers to trade using tunes? So just small tunes where they could trade their stocks. Then maybe you could create a chorus of trading, a musical chorus that represented the financial market.
You know, we're using a very, very good choir, the Elysian Singers. You could say that they are experts in Baroque and contemporary music. Rather than having the singers all concentrated in one group in the middle, we placed them around the room. You know, we created almost like a stylized trading ring so that the whole audience is seated within this, you know, in this big room here at Mansion House.
We have 3 assets. When people are investing, typically they are doing 3 things. They are trading off risk and return in the long term. So you're trying to get more return, you're trying to get rid of risk. So that for us is wealth and protection. And the third thing is, in order to be a successful investor, you actually need to survive the journey. You need to be comfortable along the way with what you're doing, the decisions you're making and what you're investing in. So actually the notion of comfort is crucially important. The evening as a whole is not just the opera. We're going to have talks leading up to that. We have an art exhibition going on at the same time by Carl Richards.
I mean, we all think money is so complex. We get these issues, there's emotion involved, and there's math and statistics. And I found that with clients, when I drew on a piece of paper or up on the whiteboard, the conversation changed. I mean, people started to understand things more.
We are creating an experimental market where the singers are themselves traders. So this is genuinely a functioning market because what they take home in pay for their performance at the end of the day depends on how well they trade. So, thank you. There was a question here.
Were the personality traits curated before the event, and how were the outcomes? Were they what you expected?
They weren't curated because we had originally hoped we'd have a whole bunch of singers to select from, and we would deliberately pick singers on the basis of a diverse range of personality traits. Given we needed 12 singers and only 12 came forward, there was no curation. Things were both expected and unexpected. Because the market on that night, the random chance pushed it downwards, the people won are the people I would have expected to have won in that circumstance, so conservative, etc. But that wasn't what we expected to happen. We actually expected the more dynamic, more risk-taking individuals should have done better in most instances of this performance. So the personality was related in the way we thought it would be. It's just that it didn't turn out, the evening didn't turn out as we thought it would be. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you pitched the project to Barclays? How long did it take you from the beginning until that night? And have you done this again or only that night at Mansion House? And what did Barclays gain from this? More about the project itself.
Yeah. So lots of questions there. The whole thing, beginning to end, was over 18 months from initial discussions to actually putting it on. Because what I do in Barclays is relatively unusual and different, I have always had very good relations with the PR and marketing people. Barclays at the time had a marketing program that was heavily focused on thoughtful events and thought leadership. So, for example, we were sponsoring the Hay Festival at the time, and the ground was fertile for this in a way that is not always the case. But I went to our marketing colleagues, pitched it very gently to start with, gradually, gave them more and more detail, got them brought in. I have to say it was much easier than I thought it would be. I got considerably less pushback than I thought I was going to. And I think that was mainly a function of the time it was, that 2012, who was in charge, what the marketing lineup and push had been. We haven't put it on since yet. I've had 3 or 4 approaches to try and do it at financial conferences, at various things. The stumbling block is that actually, although it's a relatively short work, putting it on is not a simple experience. You need a big room, you need quite a lot of tech equipment, you need 12 singers, a cellist, a conductor, sets, the whole bit. So it's not necessarily a cheap thing to put on. Didn't have to have been as expensive as we did it there, but there's a certain basic level of stuff that you need. So at the moment, everyone who's had interest has sort of shied away once we started saying, actually what it would be. And that's one of the reasons we chose to put on a whole evening, because you're going to put people through a fairly daunting piece of experimental music. You don't want it to last for longer than a half an hour, so we had to put other stuff around the edges of it. I am definitely hoping that there will be opportunities to do this in other circumstances as part of some other event at some point. And some interesting things have come out of this for me as well. So I'm now a trustee of Sound and Music, which is the UK's national agency for new music and new composition, which, although indirectly actually was a consequence of this, it sort of opened up a whole bunch of other doors that have changed my life in interesting ways as well. Was there another question? What did Barclays get out of it? PR, mostly. I mean, there were clients invited. We got some fairly nice press on the night. One of the interesting things was about the inter-industry collaboration is that the invitations, the marketing and the PR were all run by our financial PR teams. And they did a good job, but it became very clear at the end that this is completely different to how creative music PR people would have done it in terms of the timing, how you issue invitations, how far in advance you do it. It's instructive, I think, that you can't bring 2 industries together and expect that a PR function in the one is going to know how to do things for another part of the world. It didn't work quite as well as they would have liked, because they were following financial PR and marketing protocol rather than creative world PR protocol.
I think we might have to stop there, actually. Greg's going to be on the next panel anyway, so you can ask him questions on the next panel.